Start with ambition in that case. And we had a question sent in before the webinar from Robert Watt at the University of Manchester, for example, asking exactly this: given our experience with the CDM, how much confidence do you have that the Paris Agreement's proposals can really protect the environment, protect human rights, drive sustainable development, reduce global emissions? Why or why not? And maybe Jake, I'd come to you first. Also, maybe with if you could come back on MJ's proposal for the idea of a partial cancellation as one way of ensuring that there is an increase in ambition going forward from Article 6.
Well, I mean, very, very complex questions there. I mean, I think that what we are struggling with a bit in these negotiations is trying to, on the one hand, design rules that make markets fulfill their basic purpose, which I think is, as others have described, to create efficiencies in terms of pricing and opportunities to promote investment that in theory would lead to the same level of investment generating more ambition, because it would be able to achieve those emissions reductions at a lower cost. We're trying to create the right conditions for that, as opposed to then adding on top of that additional functions for markets. So that this would be a policy choice that would not only achieve the same level of ambition at a lower cost, but also have to achieve more ambition through the means of discounting or more financial flows than the investment necessary to produce the emissions reduction to also flow into adaptation as well. That's kind of where we're at the moment in these negotiations, and I think that it's going to require more than just the negotiations in Madrid to solve all of these questions and these problems to everyone's satisfaction. So let me leave it there. I mean, I think as I indicated at the outset of my remarks, you know, we are just on the cusp of an international negotiation. I think that for any of us to begin to sort of plot out where we see the landing grounds now is a little bit difficult, because we still have a lot of work to do to narrow the differences between parties. There's going to be a lot of give and take, and I don't think anyone knows exactly where we'll land, given where we're starting at the moment.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying some of these proposals around ambition, they're asking a lot. Asking a lot of carbon markets. Maybe one, I don't know whether you can answer this, but one question would be: I mean, is there a future for offsetting at all as a concept at the international level?
Well, I think there will be. I mean, this is the other thing to observe about Article 6 is that it's not creating a market on its own. It's seeking to regulate a market that in many ways already exists. And I'm not just talking about the Kyoto Protocol, but the fact that national systems are beginning to link, including the EU's ETS with Norway, and many will know we're in discussions to finalize a linking with Switzerland as well. And there are parties that are also engaged actively in generating offsets through investments, the Japanese joint crediting mechanism probably being the most high profile of those. So these markets do exist and will continue to exist. What we're trying to do is to bring as much transparency and accountability and environmental integrity to them as possible through these additional rules. With regard to offsetting in particular, I imagine that there will continue to be a market for them from those countries that are already using them, but also from ICAO, which is largely an offsetting regime, and from the private sector. You know, increasingly individuals are looking for ways in which they can offset emissions that aren't currently being regulated or aren't being regulated sufficiently by their governments.
Okay. Gilles or MJ, do either of you want to come back on the ambition point? Otherwise, I propose we move on to Corsia. Yeah. Okay, MJ, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, just one comment in response to Jake's point. I guess this relates to ambition. I mean, the way, you know, if it's really just a matter of looking at cost efficiencies and then, you know, funds saved, which is I think what also another person spoke to, I think the challenge there is that, okay, we're saving funds, but are those actually getting reinvested in more abatement? And what we've suggested is that, look, let us set up a system that creates that reinvestment in abatement. The challenge that, just the folks who have this cost efficiency perspective, the challenge with that is that it assumes that those funds naturally do get reinvested. And I don't think that we've actually seen that borne out in the KP. And also we're in a situation where we have NDCs that are static. And we know that we need to find more ambition in the next 10 years. So why not use a tool that we have to help us chisel away at that emissions gap? It's quite easy to just add a % set aside. It's quite easy. It's like the easiest tool you could possibly have. It's working for share proceeds. It can work readily for OMGE. So it's an opportunity that really shouldn't be lost, because the UN has to, there should be a rationale for the UN to be involved in emissions trading. And if there's not added value coming from the UN, why are we doing this? Then leave it to domestic systems.
Yeah, one follow-up to that came in, we can answer very briefly, is if Article 6 does mobilize finance that goes beyond the existing NDC commitments, is there a risk that would reduce the incentive to ratchet up those commitments? How do you deal with that possibility?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if Article 6 is basically mobilizing finance that goes beyond the existing emission reduction commitments in the NDCs, is there a risk that countries will have, I guess, a lower incentive or see less need to ratchet up those NDCs, because basically there's another mechanism that's taking care of emission reductions beyond them?
I don't think the scale is ever going to be that's described. I mean, I think in your first poll, the question is, well, can carbon markets functionally close the gap to 1.5? No. They're just one tool. Really, we need countries to step up and take more ambitious targets for sure. But can Article 6 contribute to reducing that gap? Absolutely. And it can do so quite mechanically, quite automatically. And that's what we're saying makes sense given what we've seen from the IPCC. Yeah.
Stefano, could I come back to you, maybe a reaction to the poll, which showed, I guess, some skepticism definitely over the role of carbon markets, and more specifically as well, I don't think you said it exactly, but your position on carrying over CDM credits. Does Haiti support that or oppose it?
Yeah, sure, happy to elaborate on that. And first of all, we do think that carbon markets and our Article 6 will have a crucial role to play under the Paris Agreement, as I was describing earlier. And I think, it's a bit misleading, I think, to think about all of this just as offsetting, or to think back at how things worked under Kyoto. Both the scale of the challenge and what Article 6 could offer is entirely different. And we should think about it more broadly than just as an offsetting tool under the Paris Agreement. On carryover, and again, this is just based on conversations we had with our members. I think there is an interest in making sure that projects that are up and running now can continue to exist under the Paris Agreement if they meet the new rules set by under Article 6.4. And I think there's also a willingness to make sure that there is some sort of expedited process to assess whether a project still makes sense, and to let that project reapply and re-register under the new rules. And I think that is also essential to create a critical mass from the start. I think there is less of a concern about existing credits. And I think
how did we ensure additional ambition in that case?
In what case?
Well, if we're including credits from existing projects, these projects already exist. The credits already exist, so that's not.
So I wasn't talking about transitioning existing credits. That's what I was saying. I don't think, at least from conversations we had with some of our members, there's not a lot of concern about existing credits. It's more about existing projects if they make sense to exist under Article 6.4. I think the concerns about the transition of credits or units under the CDM can be mitigated if there is a trust in the new system and if there is trust that you will have a new system up and running soon.
Okay. Gilles, can I come to you for a quick reaction to that? And maybe you can pick up right away then on also the links between Article 6 and Corsia.
Yeah, sure. Well, I recognize it's important to think about the projects, of course, and there are some projects out there, also CDM projects that did truly benefit the climate and the environment. But perhaps we can, there are also other ways of continuing to support those projects, and they can be supported through climate finance mechanisms by buying the credits through results-based climate finance systems. And so I really see more of a risk in transitioning them, that they are going to replace new emission reductions that would have happened otherwise. Now on Corsia, well, yeah, there is a very clear link, obviously, between Article 6 and Corsia, not only because some of the markets established under Article 6 might later become eligible for airlines to use their credits, but also for the aspect of double counting. We want to make sure that we have strong rules to avoid double counting under Article 6, so that the credits used by airlines are not also used by countries. I don't really think there is any way Corsia can work without an agreement on double counting within the UNFCCC, so that's going to be a very crucial aspect. And maybe to touch on one last question you mentioned earlier on the question of what happens if there's no deal within the negotiations. Of course, it's very important that we do get a deal. At the same time, we don't want a deal at any cost. It's important to have good rules now, because as Jacob was saying, we're not just creating new markets, we're regulating markets that exist. And so if we don't have a deal, then we are going to have markets without any rules, and that's not something anybody wants either. But at the same time, having rules that don't guarantee the avoidance of double counting, or rules that allow the use of old CDM credits, also legitimizes the use of non-functioning carbon markets. And so to some extent, it's also important that, and we hope we'll see parties and countries staying very strong, not to accept weak compromises that would allow double counting, because that would just legitimize the use of a system that doesn't work.
To pick up on that last point, so what happens if there is no deal this year? I mean, physically, does that mean CDM credits continue to be traded, the projects carry on, and what does it mean for, I guess, for Corsia? What are the implications? I don't know, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, if there is no deal, then the future of the CDM is relatively uncertain. I mean, it's pretty clear the Kyoto Protocol, the CDM should end because the Kyoto Protocol comes to an end. And then there is potentially some legal unclarity whether the credits continue to exist. They could be used outside of the UNFCCC framework. I think that's not very clear, especially within Corsia, because Corsia or the ICAO could very well take a decision that's different to the one under the UNFCCC. So ICAO could decide to make the CDM credits eligible, and parties under Article 6 could decide not to use them under to meet NDCs. So, there will be some extra unclarity if there's no deal on the CDM transition.
Okay, who else wants to come back on that? I mean, I think these are two big questions that I would welcome your comments on. One is indeed the Corsia link, and something on the sequencing there, because these discussions within ICAO and here under the UNFCCC are proceeding in parallel. So how does that potentially play out? And the second question is indeed, so what if there's no deal on Article 6 this year? What does that mean on a very practical level for existing projects, for the start of new projects?